In the final desperate months of World War II, when empires were collapsing and legends were being written in fire and steel, something unbelievable happened in the Pacific Ocean. A ship so small it should never have survived charged directly toward the most powerful battleship ever built. This was not a mistake. This was not madness. It was courage at its purest form, and what followed shocked the Japanese Navy so deeply that an entire fleet, built to dominate the seas, was forced to retreat. This is the story of how a tiny ship stared down the Yamato and lived to tell the tale. The Japanese battleship Yamato was not just a warship. It was a symbol of national pride, imperial ambition, and naval supremacy. At over 72,000 tons fully loaded, Yamato was the largest and heaviest battleship ever constructed. Her main guns were so massive they could fire shells weighing more than a small car, capable of destroying enemy ships from distances never imagined before. The Japanese believed Yamato was unsinkable, built in secrecy, protected by layers of armor thicker than anything the world had seen. She represented Japan's answer to American naval power. To the Japanese Navy, Yamato was not merely a weapon, she was destiny. By 1944, however, the tides of war had turned sharply against Japan. American forces were advancing island by island, cutting off supply lines and destroying Japan's once dominant navy. Aircraft carriers had replaced battleships as the true rulers of the sea. Yamato, despite her power, found herself increasingly irrelevant, a giant sword in an age of air power. Yet Japan still believed that one decisive battle could change everything, and Yamato would be at the center of it. In April 1945, Japan launched Operation Tengo, a last-ditch naval mission that bordered on suicide. Yamato, accompanied by a small escort fleet, was ordered to sail toward Okinawa. The plan was brutally simple. Yamato would beach herself on the island and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. The crew knew they were unlikely to return. There was barely enough fuel for a one-way journey. Still, they sailed. Honor demanded it. Waiting for Yamato were not massive American battleships. Instead, scattered across the Pacific were small U.S. Navy destroyers and escort ships, lightly armored, lightly armed, and never designed to face something like Yamato. Among them were destroyer escorts, ships barely a fraction of Yamato's size. These vessels were built to hunt submarines and protect convoys, not challenge monsters. Yet one of these tiny ships would soon make history. American sailors called destroyers and destroyer escorts tin cans, thin hulls, limited firepower, and almost no armor. A single hit from Yamato's main guns could tear one apart instantly. But what these ships lacked in size, they made up for in speed, agility, and something no blueprint could design: determination. As Yamato's fleet moved closer, American radar picked up the massive formation. The reports were clear. Japan's largest battleship was advancing. Instead of retreating, American commanders ordered their small ships forward, not to win but to delay, to confuse, to buy time for aircraft carriers to launch airstrikes. And so, against every rule of naval warfare, tiny American ships charged forward. One destroyer escort, dwarfed by Yamato's shadow, turned directly toward the enemy fleet. The sea trembled as Yamato's guns rotated. The sky cracked with thunder as shells, larger than refrigerators, screamed across the water. This was no fair fight. This was a sacrifice. Yet the tiny ship kept charging. Yamato fired salvo after salvo. Columns of water rose like skyscrapers around the American ship. The shockwaves alone could have capsized it. But the destroyer danced through the explosions, zigzagging at full speed. At point-blank range, unthinkable for such a small vessel, the American ship launched torpedoes. The torpedoes missed Yamato, but that wasn't the point. The Japanese commanders were stunned. A ship this small? Charging the Yamato? This wasn't desperation. This was defiance. Japanese officers struggled to understand what they were seeing. Radar contacts appeared everywhere. Smoke screens filled the horizon. Torpedo warnings echoed through command decks. They could not tell how many ships were attacking. They could not tell where the real threat was coming from. And worse, American aircraft were on the way. While Yamato's guns focused on tiny surface targets, American carrier planes filled the sky. Dive bombers and torpedo planes descended in waves. The Yamato's legendary armor was useless against bombs dropping from above. Realizing they were walking into a trap, Japanese commanders made a decision that would echo through history. They ordered a retreat, the most powerful battleship ever built, turned away, not because she was defeated in a gunfight, but because a tiny ship forced her to hesitate. Hours later, American aircraft struck again and again. Torpedoes tore into Yamato's hull. Fires raged. Explosions ripped through her decks. Eventually, the pride of the Japanese Navy capsized and sank, taking thousands of sailors with her. The legend ended beneath the waves. This was not just the sinking of a battleship. It was the death of an era. Battleships no longer ruled the seas. Courage, coordination, and air power had replaced size and armor, and one small ship proved it. The sailors aboard that tiny American ship were not superheroes. They were ordinary men, young, scared, and fully aware they might die. Yet they charged anyway, not for glory, not for medals, but because someone had to stand in Yamato's path. History often remembers the biggest ships, the loudest guns, the most powerful empires. But sometimes, history is changed by something small, a decision, a moment, a ship that refused to turn back. Courage is not believing you will survive. Courage is moving forward even when you know you might not. That tiny ship did not defeat Yamato with firepower. It defeated her with resolve. The retreat of Yamato was more than a tactical decision. Inside the Imperial Japanese Navy, it felt like an unspoken admission. The age of absolute naval dominance was over. Officers who once believed battleships could decide wars now faced a brutal truth. Courage alone could not defeat air power, and size no longer guaranteed victory. The psychological damage of that moment lingered far longer than the battle itself. Japanese naval doctrine was built on decisive surface battles. They expected enemies to fear Yamato, to flee at the sight of her guns. But when tiny American ships charged instead of retreating, the entire mental framework collapsed. The commanders feared hidden torpedo traps, coordinated ambushes, and mass carrier strikes. In war, uncertainty can be deadlier than enemy fire. And uncertainty ruled that day. Those American destroyers and escorts were not acting randomly. They used smokescreens, erratic movements, and aggressive positioning to exaggerate their numbers. From Yamato's bridge, it looked like a coordinated assault by a much larger force. This illusion forced Japanese commanders to slow down, maneuver defensively, and ultimately withdraw, exactly what the Americans needed. Victory did not come without cost. Several American ships were damaged, some badly. Sailors were wounded, equipment destroyed, decks scorched by near misses. These men knew the odds were against them, yet not one ship broke formation. Their willingness to face certain destruction bought time that saved countless lives elsewhere in the fleet. When the air attacks resumed, Yamato was already exhausted. Her anti-aircraft guns fired endlessly, crews fighting smoke, flames, and flooding compartments. Torpedo hits slowed her, bombs shattered her decks, and internal explosions sealed her fate. When Yamato finally capsized, the explosion was so massive it was visible for miles. A thunderous end to the greatest battleship ever built. The sinking of Yamato confirmed a truth that still defines modern warfare. Dominance is not about size but adaptability. Technology, coordination, and human courage outweigh raw power. No matter how advanced a weapon may be, it is useless without strategy, and vulnerable without support. After World War II, no nation ever built another battleship like Yamato. Aircraft carriers, submarines, and later missiles became the new kings of the sea. Yamato's wreck became a tombstone marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. While Yamato is remembered worldwide, the tiny ships that challenged her are often footnotes in history books. Yet without them, the outcome could have been very different. These sailors proved that bravery is not measured in tons of steel, but in decisions made under fire. Logic said retreat. Survival said turn back. Fear said hide behind stronger ships. But courage said charge forward. That decision, unmade in seconds, changed the course of the battle and ensured that Yamato would never reach Okinawa. In every field and war, life struggle, people face giants, problems that seem too powerful to confront. The lesson of this battle is not about ships or weapons. It is about standing firm when the odds are impossible, about moving forward when retreat feels safer. The Yamato was built to dominate oceans. The tiny ship was built to protect others. When the two met, history chose courage over size. And in that moment, the world learned that even the smallest force, when driven by purpose, can make the strongest power turn away. Long after the guns fell silent and the ocean returned to calm, the story of the tiny ship that charged Yamato lived on. Naval academies studied it. Military strategists wrote about it, and ordinary people, hearing the tale decades later, felt its timeless power. Sometimes the smallest, most unassuming force can force the greatest power to pause. Courage, ingenuity, and resolve can create ripples that change history. The battle fundamentally shifted naval strategy. Japan's reliance on super-heavy battleships became a cautionary tale. For the U.S. Navy, the effectiveness of small, agile ships in coordinated attacks validated their investment in destroyers and escort vessels. The David versus Goliath engagement became a case study in psychological warfare, showing that even the largest weapon systems can be neutralized with clever tactics and audacity. Today, modern navies still study this moment. In an era of aircraft carriers, stealth submarines, and precision-guided missiles, the principle remains the same. Speed, adaptability, and boldness often outweigh raw power. A single well-timed maneuver can change the outcome of an entire operation. The courage to act decisively, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is timeless. Beyond ships, weapons, and strategy, the battle reminds us of the human element in war. The men on that tiny ship were young, terrified, and outmatched. Yet they acted with clarity and bravery that steel and armor alone could never replicate. Their story is a testament to the impact of leadership, training, and unwavering resolve, a reminder that human courage can bend the course of events. Yamato's sinking is dramatic, but the real hero is often forgotten, the small ship that dared to challenge it. History tends to glorify giants, but true lessons often come from those who defy them. The tiny ship embodies the idea that determination, skill, and courage, no matter how small, can confront forces that seem unbeatable. It is a story of hope, strategy, and fearless action. When we watch the oceans today, or study history, the imagery is clear. A massive battleship, representing overwhelming might, is forced to retreat not by another giant, but by a single small vessel willing to take action. Symbolically, this battle transcends war. It teaches resilience, the power of the underestimated, and the idea